Ooh boy, oh boy, oh boy. 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 And hello, everybody. A quick note. The Oakland Athletics are making the same mistakes, specifically Dave Kaval, the A's president, that Dave made in Howard Terminal's Oakland's example with tax increment financing, that in now, with nary a thought, are poised to do the same thing in Las Vegas. In fact, they're actually making those mistakes. Let me be specific. All right. 2 years ago, when Dave first announced that the Howard Terminal project would be $12 billion in size, he said that was an economic impact. I texted him and I said, that's not economic impact. That is build out. And I said, further, if you're going to use tax increment financing, you've agreed that you're going to, then you have to announce what the tax increment revenue will be from that, which is $9.7 billion. He didn't do that. He just kept yelling, and you remember this, well, it's $12 billion. Well, we're putting $12 billion. We're contributing $12 billion. They did have another study that announced the actual, hey, how you doing, economic impact. This is not going to be a long one. I'll follow up more on it later, okay? But it's extremely important because they could blow it. And the way things are going, there's a lot of details to be worked out, but Dave's penchant for speaking without doing math is haunting this project, okay? Okay. No, it's not that. That's not the issue. That is not, 9 acres is not the issue. Do the math. I'm talking about the real bond math, okay? If you don't, let's just do things, Jesus, that you don't know. If you don't understand bonds, read about it and then figure out how to do that. Pay attention to the hard stuff. That's wrong. I don't know where you're getting that from. It's got nothing to do with it. Period. Okay? Nothing. I don't know where you're getting that from, but Ben Garcia proved that can work. Now let me get back to the real deal and stop doing that. Listen. All right. In order to issue a bond that the markets will accept, you have to have enough revenue projected to cover the expense of the bond. For a municipal bond, that's ideally 2-to-1 ratio. Clark County and its finance director, Jefferson Colvin, wants a 2-to-1 bond tax increment revenue to bond debt ratio. The A's consistently interrupt that with their own desires, which are topped by, get this, the same problem that was in Oakland, where Dave would announce he's using tax increment financing, would announce that the project's $12 billion, but then he would chortle that they're not going to pay a property tax. To which I would say, Dave, you cannot say you're using tax increment financing and then announce that you are not going to pay a property tax, because it means that either you don't know tax increment financing or you haven't ran the numbers to figure out that you can't do tax increment financing without, as the law calls for, paying a tax. Now, originally, when this problem was presented to be my friends who are working on this, they said, well, they're going to replace the property tax with a possessory interest tax. But the A's don't want to pay any tax at all. That's the problem. They're being, here's that word that you know oh so well, cheap. You can't do this with cheap approaches that involve other people's money, okay? And the A's don't want to take their own money and pay it into the tax increment. That's the problem. It's a big problem. And no, Jeremy Arguello did them no favors by announcing that they didn't want to pay a property tax, but he was, as it happens, being a good soldier and communicating their wants. But this is the A's being, and I have to say it, ridiculous again. This is, I'm not going to use bad language here, okay? But they are really threatening a successful path to completion of this project by their almost manic approach to wanting to not spend a dime, okay? They've got to spend something out of a project that should yield billions of dollars in revenue annually at that location in that city. All right? Right there. So I would think that, I mean, they've got Bally's putting some money in as well, but that's different. I'm focused on right now the bond issue. And the A's need to pay a property tax. The bottom line is they got to pay a property tax. Otherwise, tax increment financing doesn't work. And the county is not, particularly in this environment, we have people desirous for affordable housing, wanting to create jobs. Others so struggling for money that they're turning to drugs and fentanyl. This is a really stupid environment for the Athletics to go into this town and basically say, mine, 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 I don't want to give you anything. And that's essentially what's going on. Or if they want to give a little anything, it's a little tiny bit. They have to pay a property tax or a possessory interest tax, period, if they want to own the stadium. Because now it sounds like they're switching back from that. And at first I thought this was a situation like, initially with the Raiders where they went from 1, 2, 3 different sites before settling on where Allegiant Stadium is now. But this is John and Dave trying to get something done, being manic. John leading Dave being a good soldier to John, not saying, hey, John, we can't really do this that way. And then coming out with egg on their faces. And that's what's going on right now. The good news in all of this is there are a lot of people there are a lot of issues to work through. Nothing is concrete. It was described to me as fascinating, getting more fascinating as it goes. All right. To which I said, I've had a lot of experience with this in this situation, because when Dave started out with this whole thing about a ballpark, he was certain in the Oakland context that public money couldn't be used. I showed him that SB 293, SB 628 Beal allowed to use tax increment revenue. And that's where he came up with the idea to work with Nancy Skinner, create SB 293 Skinner, okay? So, but the bottom line now is that they don't want to pay a property tax. And if you don't pay a property tax or a possessory interest tax, and you happen to be the owner of what is going to be the largest producer of tax revenue of that type and other types on the entire property, then there's a problem for everybody. And get this, on top of all that, do you realize that the A's don't want to talk to the county? Does that sound like idiotic? And yeah, I said it. This is the first time I had been critical of them. But when I got wind of this, I said, this is the same tone that I used with Dave when privately in Oakland. It's going to get more interesting and more interesting. So I'm not going to predict an end game here. The reason is there are too many people involved in this project in Las Vegas for it to just simply crash and burn. And they are in the right places and they are of the right minds to keep John and Dave from falling on their sword. Let's see what happens. Subscribe to Zenny62 and bookmark OaklandNewsNowBlog.com, and I'll be back.